Story 1.
I write this letter with trembling hands, my nerves frayed. The pen in my grip feels heavy, almost foreign, as if I'm not just writing, but etching my very soul onto these pages. I can't believe what I'm about to tell you is real. Maybe I'm crazy. But when they tried to diagnose me, all they did was shake their heads, advising me to stop talking nonsense and try to cope with my violent fantasy. It all started 6 months ago, a time when life seemed simple, my days filled with the mundane yet comforting routine of a high school senior. I was studying hard for the SAT. The pages of my textbooks often blurred into a dance of numbers and words as I pushed myself into the late hours of the night. The silence of my room, punctuated only by the soft ticking of the clock and the occasional turn of a page, was a sanctuary of sorts. My participation in extracurricular and social activities was not just a pursuit of interest, but a meticulously planned strategy. Sports, volunteer work, school clubs, you name it, I was there. Each activity was a carefully placed piece in the puzzle of my resume, all for one single goal, to get accepted by a prestigious university. Life was good, in a predictable, comfortable way. I had a happy family. My parents, always supportive, often worried about me overworking myself, but proud nonetheless. My younger sister, with her endless chatter about school dramas, provided a much-needed distraction from my own stress. And then there was my small group of friends, a tight-knit circle who valued my opinions and showed genuine love and support. We were a band of dreamers, each chasing our own version of the future. It was a time of ambition, a time when my peers and I were desperately trying to make up for lost time in everything. Be it studies or a failed romance, there was a palpable sense of urgency in the air, a collective scramble to seize every opportunity, to right every wrong. The school year was in full swing, a routine of classes, homework, and the occasional high school drama firmly established when she arrived. Her name was Isabella, and from the moment she stepped into the school, she was unlike anyone we had ever seen. Isabella had an air about her that was at once captivating and disconcerting. She was undeniably beautiful, with long, dark brown hair that fell in light waves around her shoulders, framing her face in a way that seemed almost deliberate, as if each strand was carefully placed to enhance her mysterious allure. When she moved, her hair caught the light, shimmering with fires of hues, like sunlight dancing on a calm sea. Her eyes were large and honey-colored, framed by thick black lashes that gave her gaze a depth that was hard to decipher. It was as if her eyes held secrets, stories untold that beckoned you closer, even as they warned you to keep your distance. Her skin was olive-toned, glowing with a golden hue under the rays of the sun, and her lips were lush and red, often curved in a knowing smile that hinted at an inner amusement. Her style of dress was as distinctive as her appearance. She always dressed brightly, favoring colors that seemed to enhance her natural radiance. Wherever she went, she attracted attention, turning heads and drawing whispers. I remember the day she first walked into our classroom. The sun was streaming through the windows, casting patterns of light and shadow across the desks. The teacher introduced her as Isabella, and as she looked around the room, her gaze lingered on each of us for a moment, as if committing our faces to memory. I liked her immediately, though I couldn't have explained why. One day I walked past her locker and saw her opening it. The way she did it was oddly fascinating, deliberate and graceful, as if even this simple act was part of a larger, unseen dance. She noticed me watching her and smiled. As the weeks passed, I couldn't help but notice that among all my friends, it was me who seemed to hold Isabella's attention the most. She often sought me out, her honey-colored eyes lingering on me during our conversations. Despite this, we never progressed beyond the bounds of friendly chats. My commitment to Nancy, my girlfriend, was a line I wasn't willing to cross. Nancy, with her easy smile and no-nonsense attitude, had been a steady presence in my life for over a year. Our relationship was comfortable, familiar. A month into Isabella's arrival, the initial buzz that surrounded her began to fade. The novelty of the new mysterious girl wore off, and she gradually became just another student in the crowded hallways of our school. Still, her beauty and aura of mystery kept her at the center of attention, particularly among the boys. I watched as various guys tried their luck, approaching Isabella with clumsy attempts at charm. They offered her gifts, flowers, chocolates, even a few love letters that looked more like essays. But Isabella turned them all down, her rejections polite yet firm. It seemed she wasn't interested in dating, or perhaps she hadn't found anyone who caught her interest. Instead, Isabella threw herself into her studies with a fervor that was almost alarming. I would often see her in the library, her head buried in books that ranged from classic literature to advanced physics. She had a hunger for knowledge that was insatiable, devouring information with an intensity that was both impressive and slightly unnerving. As days turned into weeks, I began to notice a shift in Isabella's behavior towards me. She had a way of sitting close enough that I could catch the subtle scent of her perfume, a faint aroma that reminded me of old books and autumn leaves. In class, her presence became more pronounced, her gaze often resting on me for longer than was comfortable. I caught her several times sketching in her notebook, and one day, driven by curiosity, I managed to glance at her drawings. To my surprise, I found myself staring back from the pages. It was flattering and unsettling in equal measure. I wasn't exactly a stranger to attention. Without sounding conceited, I was well known in school. A combination of decent academic performance, a spot on the varsity football team, and a generally sociable demeanor made me fairly popular. My appearance, which I'd always taken a casual pride in, now seemed to serve as a point of fascination for Isabella. But as I sit here, scribbling down these memories, that version of me seems like a distant echo. The reflection that stares back at me now from the mirror is a shadow of that former self. Dark circles under hollow eyes, a gaunt face, and hands that tremble with an unrelenting mix of fear and malnutrition. But let's return to the story, to those days that now seem so innocuously serene in hindsight. Isabella's interest in me was a topic of mild amusement among my friends. They'd nudge me with knowing looks, teasingly suggesting there was more to her attention than mere artistic appreciation. Nancy, on the other hand, didn't find it amusing. Her smiles became less frequent, replaced by a tight-lipped concern. Our conversations often circled back to Isabella, Nancy's words tinged with an edge of jealousy and worry. The day I saw Isabella painting my face with such vigor, I felt curious. Her focus on the sketch was so fervent, it seemed as if she was trying to capture something more than just my physical likeness. After class, driven by a blend of curiosity and vanity, I approached her. She looked up, her honey-colored eyes meeting mine, and with a gentle smile she carefully tore out the sheet of paper and handed it to me. I expected her to wait, to watch my reaction, but she simply gathered her things and left the class, her steps light and graceful. Holding the drawing, I was struck by the meticulous detail. It was more than a mere sketch. It was as if a part of me had been transferred onto the paper. Every line, every contour of my face was captured with an almost eerie precision. It was beautiful and unsettling in equal measure. Later that day, I saw her again, standing by the school gates. She appeared to be waiting for something, or someone. As our eyes met, there was an unspoken acknowledgement, a connection that went beyond words. I walked over, the drawing still in my hand. "Thank you, Isabella. I really enjoyed it," I said, trying to convey my appreciation. Her smile widened, a glint of something unidentifiable in her eyes. "Shall we go for a walk together?" she asked, her voice tinged with hopeful anticipation. We spent the next half hour wandering the streets near the school. The conversation was surprisingly easy, Isabella speaking with a fluidity that was captivating. She told me about the places she had lived before moving here, painting vivid pictures of distant towns and cities. She spoke of her relatives in a detached manner, mentioning them more as characters in a story rather than people she was connected to. As we were about to part ways, she turned to me with a question that took me by surprise. "Can I paint you on a good canvas?" Her voice was earnest, her gaze intense. The proposal was unexpected, but I found myself agreeing without much hesitation. The idea of being immortalized in a painting by someone as talented as Isabella was flattering, and I was curious to see how she would translate my likeness into a larger, more permanent medium. The following days were marked by a sense of anticipation. I found myself distracted, my thoughts often drifting to Isabella and the upcoming portrait session. Nancy noticed the change in me, her expressions fluctuating between concern and annoyance. Our conversations grew more strained, the unspoken tension between us thickening like fog. When the day finally came for Isabella to paint my portrait, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She had asked me to meet her at her house, a quaint old building that stood at the edge of town. The house had an air of neglect about it, the paint peeling in places, the garden overgrown. But there was a charm to it, a sense of history that was almost palpable. Isabella greeted me at the door, her smile warm yet enigmatic. She led me to a room that she had converted into a studio. The space was filled with canvases, some blank, some adorned with hauntingly beautiful paintings. The light filtered in through the dusty windows, casting a soft glow on the array of brushes and paints that lay neatly arranged on a table. Isabella's demeanor as she painted was focused, almost trance-like. When she finally stepped back, signaling that the session was over, I felt a rush of relief. I was eager to see the painting, to see how she had captured me, but Isabella covered it with a cloth before I could get a glimpse. "It's not ready yet," she said, her voice distant. "You'll see it when it's finished." I must confess, there was an undeniable pull towards Isabella, a gravitational force that seemed to draw me into her orbit with each passing day. We continued to spend time together after school, our conversations meandering through a myriad of topics, from the mundane to the profound. There was an ease in our interactions, a comfort in the way our thoughts and words intertwined. However, there was Nancy. She had been a constant in my life, a grounding presence amidst the whirlwinds of teenage drama. But as my connection with Isabella deepened, so too did the rift between Nancy and me. The day she confronted me about my time with Isabella was inevitable. I remember it vividly. The accusation in her eyes, the quiver in her voice that spoke of hurt and betrayal. Nancy's reaction was explosive, a mixture of anger, jealousy, and tears. Despite my assurances that Isabella and I were just friends, she saw through the thin veil of my half-truths. Deep down, I knew Nancy was right. My feelings for Isabella had transcended the bounds of mere friendship. It was my fault that things had come to this point. I could have set clear boundaries with Isabella from the start, could have maintained a respectful distance, but the truth was, I didn't want to. Confronted with Nancy's ultimatum, I was torn. Part of me rebelled at the idea of cutting Isabella out of my life. Yet I couldn't bear the thought of losing Nancy. After a long, sleepless night wrestling with my conscience, I made a decision. I would do as Nancy asked, as I had promised. I would stop all communication with Isabella. The following day was heavy with unspoken words and lingering glances. When I saw Isabella, her eyes searched mine, a question unasked yet clearly understood. I avoided her, each step away from her feeling like a betrayal of what I truly wanted. But I had made a promise to Nancy, and I intended to keep it. The day I noticed Isabella's gaze had changed, transformed from curiosity and affection into something colder, more resentful, it unsettled me. Her eyes, once warm and inviting, now seemed to bore into me with a sharpness that felt almost tangible. I hadn't expected to confront her after school, but as fate would have it, our paths crossed. The schoolyard was nearly empty, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the concrete. As I approached her, I could feel the weight of the moment, the inevitable confrontation that loomed between us. "I thought you liked me," Isabella said, her voice tinged with a hurt that seemed to go deeper than mere disappointment. "That something was possible between us. Why did you give me hope?" Her words struck a chord in me, guilt and confusion intertwining in a tight knot. Before I could respond, she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried an intensity I had never heard from her before. "I want to say something. I love you. Be with me, or else I will make it so." She trailed off, but the implication was clear. It sounded like a threat, veiled but unmistakable. At the time, I didn't take it seriously, but a part of me was unnerved by the intensity in her eyes. In a mix of annoyance and bewilderment, I replied, "I didn't mean to give you any reason. I was just talking to you as a friend. You knew I had a sweetheart, my Nancy. If you thought I gave you an excuse, I'm sorry, it wasn't like that." Confusion reigned in my mind. I had never been in such a contradictory situation before. My words, meant to be conciliatory, seemed to have the opposite effect. I watched as Isabella's face contorted with anger and hatred, her features momentarily twisting into something vile and repulsive. A shiver of horror ran down my spine at the sight. With a soft, almost sinister smirk, she said, "You'll be sorry," and then turned, walking away with a grace that belied the malice in her words. I stood there, frozen, as the chill of the evening air began to seep into my bones. Walking home, I replayed the conversation in my head, each word echoing with a foreboding I couldn't shake. The image of Isabella's distorted face haunted me, a glimpse into a side of her I hadn't known existed. The streets were quiet, the rhythmic sound of my footsteps a lonely accompaniment to my troubled thoughts. Arriving home, I found no relief. The house was empty, my parents still at work, and the silence felt oppressive. I went to the kitchen, mechanically preparing a sandwich, but my appetite was gone. The food tasted like ash in my mouth. By the time evening rolled around, the events of the day with Isabella had receded to the back of my mind, leaving only a lingering bitterness. Wrapped comfortably in my blanket, I was on the cusp of sleep when a peculiar sound shattered the silence. A scratching, a persistent clawing was coming from the wall outside my bedroom window. The sound grew in intensity, morphing into a desperate scrabbling that sent shivers down my spine. In a sudden rush of fear, I bolted from my bed, my heart pounding in my ears. The hallway seemed longer than usual as I sprinted towards the safety of my parents' room. I burst in, panting, to find my mom reading at the table while my dad was just dozing off. Their surprised faces turned to amusement as I blurted out my story. They laughed, a light-hearted chuckle that stung me more than I cared to admit. "You're such an adult, yet scared like a little kid," my mom teased. I could see they didn't believe me, brushing it off as an overactive imagination. Offended and frustrated, I left their room, my mind racing with unanswered questions and rising panic. What was I to do? Returning to my room was out of the question. The scratching sound still echoed in my mind, too real to be dismissed as mere fancy. In a moment of desperation, I grabbed my phone and dialed Nancy's number, seeking comfort and understanding. When Nancy answered, her voice was a balm to my frazzled nerves. I recounted my experience, expecting skepticism but hoping for support. To my surprise, she didn't laugh or dismiss my fears. Instead, there was a gravity in her tone that I had never heard before. She confessed that she had experienced something similar, a revelation that sent a fresh wave of terror through me. We agreed to meet at the vacant lot not far from my house, a neutral ground away from prying eyes and unsettling noises. Hurriedly, I dressed, my movements erratic, fueled by adrenaline and fear. I told my parents I was going for a walk with Nancy. Their response, a playful jibe about my being a little coward, did nothing to ease my apprehension. "Don't stay out too long," my dad called out as I hurried out the door, his words tinged with paternal concern beneath the teasing. The night was darker than usual, the moon obscured by thick clouds, casting the world in murky shadows. The vacant lot was a 5-minute walk from my house, but tonight it felt like an eternity. Every rustle of the wind, every creak of the branches, set my nerves on edge. The cold wind bit into my skin as I raced towards the vacant lot, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The night was oppressively dark. My heart pounded in my chest, a relentless drum echoing my fear. What I saw upon arriving at the lot froze me in my tracks, a scene straight out of a nightmare. Nancy lay on the ground, her body a broken, bleeding mess. Hovering over her was a creature, a grotesque parody of a dog. It was large, rat-like, with matted, frizzy hair that seemed to drip with some unidentifiable liquid. Its sharp teeth tore mercilessly at Nancy's face, ripping off her cheek with a sickening diligence. For a few agonizing moments, I was paralyzed, horror rooting me to the spot. The scene before me was too gruesome, too surreal to process. Then, my stomach revolted, a violent surge of nausea overwhelming me. I vomited uncontrollably, my body convulsed. As I fell to my knees, weak and trembling, the creature's red eyes snapped towards me. It was a gaze filled with malice, a malevolent intelligence that sent a chill slicing through my already frigid body. In that instant, I knew I had to act, to defend myself. With a desperate scramble, I grabbed a rock from the ground, its rough surface biting into my palm. I hurled it at the beast with all the strength I could muster. The creature, with an agility that belied its grotesque form, dodged the projectile easily. It snarled, a sound that was guttural and chilling, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. Panic took over, and I turned to run, but my foot caught on something unseen in the darkness. I stumbled, falling hard onto the unforgiving ground. Pain exploded in my head as it struck the earth, stars dancing before my eyes. I tried to rise, but a searing agony in my legs stopped me. The creature was upon me, its teeth sunk deep into my flesh. The pain was blinding, a white-hot intensity that obliterated all other sensations. I could feel the warm blood gushing from the wound, the creature's breath hot and foul against my skin. My screams tore through the night, a desperate plea for help that I knew would go unanswered. The last vestiges of consciousness slipped away from me, the world fading to black as the creature's jaws tightened their grip. I awoke to a world of sterile white, the sharp antiseptic smell of the hospital stinging my nostrils. My legs were swathed in bandages, a dull, throbbing pain pulsating through them. Above me, the ceiling tiles blurred into focus, each one a stark reminder of the grim reality I now faced. My mother was there, her chair pulled close to my bed. Her hand was clasped around mine, a lifeline in this sea of uncertainty. Her eyes, red-rimmed and weary, lit up with a mixture of relief and exhaustion when she saw me stir. "Son, finally," she said, her voice a whisper of hope. "Everyone already thought it would end badly for you. Are you feeling okay?" Her words triggered a flood of memories, a torrent of horror that crashed over me with unrelenting force. The image of the creature, that monstrous parody of a dog feasting on Nancy, flashed in my mind. I let out a strangled cry, the sound of despair incarnate. "What happened? Is Nancy all right? Tell me I dreamed the whole thing." My mother's face crumpled, her eyes lowering as she delivered the words that shattered my world. "Nancy is gone," she murmured. "She was attacked by some predatory animal. That's what the police said. They found you covered in blood, with bitten feet, but most importantly alive." The room seemed to spin, a carousel of pain and disbelief. I felt a piercing headache, the pain of physical manifestation of the horror that gripped my soul. In a voice barely above a whisper, I said, "Mom, I saw everything. It was a dog, but it was unusual, like it was intelligent, you know." Her look, one of pity and disbelief, stung me. It was the gaze one gives to someone who has lost touch with reality, a look that labeled me as delusional. This infuriated me, the frustration and fear boiling over into rage. "I'm telling the truth," I yelled. "Why won't anyone believe me?" At my outburst, a nurse hurried into the room, her face a mask of professional concern. She quickly assessed the situation, her movements practiced and efficient. I barely felt the prick of the needle as she administered the sedative, my consciousness already teetering on the edge. As the drug coursed through my veins, dulling the pain and pulling me down into a murky haze, I caught snippets of the nurse's conversation with my mother. "He's delirious," she said in a soothing tone. "It will pass." Those words echoed in my mind as I drifted off, a mantra of dismissal that sought to negate the horror I had witnessed. But deep down, I knew the truth. What I had seen, what I had experienced, was no delusion. The creature, that nightmarish beast, was real. In the deep embrace of night, I awoke to a world shrouded in darkness. The hospital room, illuminated only by the faint glow of the hallway light seeping under the door, felt claustrophobic, a cage of shadows. My heart raced, adrenaline coursing through my veins as my eyes adjusted to the dim light. There, in the darkness, two red eyes glowed ominously. My breath caught in my throat, terror gripping me with icy fingers. Then, a quiet voice broke the silence, a voice that sent shivers down my spine. "It's me, Isabella." Her words were a cold whisper, a chilling wind that swept through the room. "I told you that you would regret it, but I'm going to give you another chance. Be with me, and your family will not be harmed. What's your answer to that?" I lay there, frozen in fear, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. It had to be a hallucination, a side effect of the medication. But the red glow of her eyes, the palpable sense of menace that filled the room, it was all too real. "Who are you? What kind of monster are you?" I managed to stammer, my voice trembling with dread. Isabella moved closer, her hand covering my mouth with an unnerving gentleness. "We are called Nagual," she whispered. "We are a race of humans, mages, shamans, werewolves, but no one will believe you." Her words hung in the air, a declaration of a reality too bizarre, too frightening to comprehend. My mind struggled to process the information, to make sense of the impossible. "I'm going to leave now, and you think whether your family is dear to you. Think well," she said, her tone a mix of warning and enticement. As her hand stroked my face, a gesture that should have been comforting but was anything but, I felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. Then, as silently as she had appeared, Isabella left the room, melting into the shadows like a ghost. I lay there, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to convince myself that it had been a dream, a figment of my imagination. But the cold touch of her hand on my face, the lingering sense of her presence, it was all too real. The room felt oppressive, the darkness a tangible presence that seemed to press down on me. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but fear held my voice captive. What could I say? Who would believe such an outlandish story? Nagual. The word echoed in my mind, a term from folklore and legend, now given terrifying substance. Mages, shamans, werewolves. The words were like pieces of a puzzle, falling into place to form a picture that was as fascinating as it was horrifying. I lay there for what felt like hours, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and fears. The night seemed endless, a void in which time had ceased to exist. Every creak of the hospital, every rustle of the sheets sent my heart racing, a constant reminder of the nightmare that had become my reality. The night stretched on endlessly, a tapestry of shadows and fears. Each creak and murmur of the hospital seemed to whisper Isabella's name, a relentless reminder of the terror that had infiltrated my life. Sleep was an elusive dream, its absence leaving me in a state of heightened anxiety, expecting at any moment to see those red eyes emerge from the darkness. As afternoon dawned, bringing with it the mundane rhythms of hospital life, my resolve hardened. I had to tell someone, to share the unbelievable truth of what I had witnessed. The doctor, a middle-aged man with kind blue eyes and a reassuring demeanor, seemed like my best chance. But as I poured out my story, his expression shifted from concern to something akin to detached professionalism. My heart sank as he called in a psychiatrist. Their disbelief was a tangible thing, a wall of skepticism that I could not penetrate. They subjected me to a battery of tests, probing and questioning, but their conclusions were clear. I was adequate. My experiences dismissed as the desperate attempts of a traumatized mind to make sense of tragedy. The psychiatrist, with his practiced calm and analytical gaze, suggested that I was trying to rationalize the horrific events that had befallen Nancy and me. He spoke of grief, of shock, of the mind's ability to conjure fantastical explanations for the inexplicable. But his words felt like hollow echoes, meaningless in the face of the reality I had experienced. I was left alone, my story unbelieved, my fears unacknowledged. The sense of isolation was crushing, a weight that pressed down on me with every passing hour. In this sterile, indifferent environment, I felt like a ghost, unseen and unheard. As the day waned, a desperate plan began to form in my mind. I wouldn't let Isabella win to bring harm to my family. I couldn't stand by and watch as my life and the lives of those I loved were destroyed by this malevolent force. In a moment of reckless determination, I managed to steal a bottle of strong tranquilizers from the nurse's station. My hands trembled as I clutched the small vial, the pills inside a promise of escape, of an end to the nightmare. I sat there on the edge of my hospital bed, the bottle in my hand. My thoughts were a chaotic swirl of fear, love, and resolve. Nancy's face floated in my mind, her smile a bittersweet memory that pierced my heart. I clung to the image of her, a beacon in the dark sea of my despair. With a shaky breath, I unscrewed the cap of the bottle. The pills lay there, innocuous yet deadly. This was it, my final act, a sacrifice to protect those I cared for. My death would be a shield, a barrier against the darkness that threatened to consume us all. I penned this note, a final testament to the truth of my experiences. To whoever reads this, I implore you to believe me, to heed my warning. Be vigilant. Be cautious, for the world is not as it seems. There are shadows that lurk in the corners of reality, dangers that defy explanation. To my family, I leave my love, a love that transcends the boundaries of life and death. Know that I did this to protect you, to keep you safe from the horrors that stalked my every waking moment. And to Isabella, if by some cruel twist of fate you ever read these words, know that my final thoughts were of defiance. You may have claimed my life, but you will never claim my spirit. Vern in hell.
Story 2.
It was Wednesday, and I was sitting in the lecture hall listening to the professor talk enthusiastically about his work at the nuclear test site. As I turned my head to look around, I noticed how my friends sitting next to me were absorbing every word he said. The professor continued, "So we conducted research aimed at understanding the effects of radiation on living organisms. This work was not only important but also extremely responsible. You see, radiation is an invisible enemy. It has no smell, color, or taste, yet its impact on living tissues can be devastating. During our experiments, we discovered that even minimal exposure can lead to cellular mutations, altering the DNA of organisms. These changes can be passed down through generations, causing genetic anomalies in subsequent generations. Furthermore, radiation has a significant impact on reproductive function, reducing organisms' ability to reproduce. Equally important is its effect on the immune system, making the organism more vulnerable to diseases. It's crucial to realize that the impact of radiation is not only a current problem for people working in hazardous conditions, but also for society as a whole, as radioactive contamination of the environment can have long-term consequences for all life on the planet. After this monologue, one of the students asked, "How long did you work there?" To which the professor replied, "About 5 years." Then came another question. "Professor, is it true that you were breeding mutants there?" The professor smiled. No, what are you talking about, mutants, but..." He hesitated, seeming to search for the right words, then continued, "One private company that worked after us was accused of conducting certain experiments. There were rumors that they might have been involved in such research, but of course it's just rumors." The room buzzed with whispers and gasps of surprise. The professor's story captivated us all, and I pondered the secrets hidden behind the walls of the nuclear test site. Once the lecture ended, my friends and I stepped outside, and immediately a debate erupted. John insisted that creating mutants was pure fantasy, while Mike argued that science knows no bounds and anything is possible. Jess and Liz, with smiles on their faces, watched the debates unfold. Trying to reconcile the sides, I intervened, suggesting we leave this question aside, as we probably wouldn't ever know the truth. The faces of my friends clouded with dissatisfaction. Suddenly, as if something important had dawned on him, Mike turned sharply and ran somewhere, leaving us puzzled in the middle of the sidewalk, wondering what could have surprised him so much and where he was heading. "Where is he going?" John scratched his head in bewilderment. "Probably some crazy idea popped into his head again." Jess gently shook her head. We simply shrugged in agreement, and without further thought headed to the nearest cafeteria to satisfy our hunger and discuss what had happened over lunch. After lunch, we received a group message from Mike on our phones. He asked us to come to laboratory number 5 immediately, claiming he had something important he wanted to show us. Despite initial reluctance, curiosity got the better of us and we all agreed to go there. 10 minutes later, we reached the building where the laboratories were located. This building always seemed special to me. An old structure with high ceilings and long corridors that seemed to echo with the discoveries of the past. The walls were adorned with old scientific posters and diagrams, giving it an aura of rigor and knowledge. Laboratory doors alternated with small plaques indicating their numbers. Finally, we found the right door and entered. The laboratory was filled with light from numerous daylight lamps, illuminating the work tables cluttered with various equipment, microscopes, test tubes, chemical reagents, and experimental setups. On one side stood a bookshelf with books and folders neatly arranged by research topics. In the center of the room was a large work table where students usually gathered to discuss projects. Behind the table, we were greeted by Mike and a lab assistant who instantly stood out with his unconventional appearance, long beard, and eccentric hairstyle. It was Oliver, known in university circles for his unusual interests. Oliver was an expert in the field of urban exploration of abandoned places and alternative history, combining these passions with a love for retro technologies. As we approached, the conversation stopped. Mike stood up, offered us seats, and while we were settling down, unaware of where it was all going, Oliver turned off the lights and closed the blinds. Then he turned on the projector, and with a smile on his face, Mike began to explain his plan. "All right, after our debate today, I came up with an idea. Why don't we go to that same test site where our professor worked?" I shared this idea with Oliver, who, more than anyone else, is into these kinds of things. He told me that the site has been abandoned for a long time and isn't as heavily guarded. So, infiltrating shouldn't be too difficult. Maybe we'll even find some interesting data there. Then Oliver chimed in, approaching the screen and providing more details. "Here are the laboratory buildings we plan to infiltrate. And here is the beginning of the test site itself. Don't worry about radiation, it's minimal there." Glancing at each other, we realized that we really couldn't let Mike go to such a place alone. Since childhood, we had always been together, supporting each other in any situation. Despite our reluctance and doubts, all of us except Liz agreed. She remained adamant. "I'm not crazy enough to go there." Mike, seizing the opportunity to tease, retorted, "You've always been a scaredy cat, Liz." Her glare in response was filled with anger, but the argument didn't escalate further. From that moment on, we moved on to discussing the details of our upcoming adventure, what to bring, and the meeting time. At the meeting point near the supermarket at 8 p.m., almost everyone had gathered, except for Mike and Oliver. To my surprise, Liz was among those present. Upon my questioning look, Jess quietly responded, "She didn't want to go, but I convinced her." I nodded in understanding, and together we continued to wait. After some time, a small van pulled into the parking lot, resembling the famous van from the cartoon Scooby-Doo. But with one clear difference, it was decorated with skulls. It was Oliver's vehicle. When Mike and Oliver stepped out of the van, we couldn't hide our surprise at their attire. They were dressed in military gear. Mike wore a camouflage jumpsuit, making him look like a member of a special forces unit, while Oliver sported a bandana with a military pattern wrapped around his head. Both were clad in heavy-duty boots, tactical vests hung on their chests, filled with pockets and pouches for various items that might be needed on the expedition. Flashlights and multi-tools were attached to their belts, adding even more seriousness to their appearance. Our amazement was so great that we could only stare at them in disbelief. Mike, puffing out his chest, began to pace back and forth as if trying to show off. Meanwhile, we couldn't help but smile and shake our heads, and then began loading our belongings into the van. Once everything was in place, Mike, with a pompous look, exclaimed to us, "Well, guys, ready for some adventures?" In response, we demonstratively lowered our heads and pretended to be asleep, eliciting his mock indignation. "You're always like this." To which we couldn't help but burst into laughter. Starting the engine, we set off on our journey. Oliver's van, which he affectionately called the Explorer, slowly made its way along winding roads leading into uncharted territories. Moonlit forests flashed by outside the windows, creating an illusion of traveling through another dimension. Music played softly, adding airiness to the atmosphere, while John, crushed in the corner, tried to fall asleep despite the excitement gripping his friends. Mike, on the other hand, was full of energy and inspiration, occasionally jotting down notes in his notebook about possible discoveries that awaited them ahead. As we neared the test site, Mike suddenly slowed down and turned off the headlights, aiming not to attract unnecessary attention. We continued our journey more cautiously, relying only on the instrument panel illumination. Finally, we arrived at the test site. The immense silence of the place struck us immediately. Quietly parking under the trees, we stepped out of the car. Mike and Oliver pulled out suspicious-looking bags and then led us toward the fence. Opening one of the bags, they took out a massive bolt cutter and began cutting a hole in the chain-link fence. The girls, looking at this, exclaimed, "You've lost your minds!" But Mike, putting a finger to his lips and making a shh sound, asked them to be quiet. From the girls' eyes, it was evident that they wanted to hit him. Soon they finished their work, and a hole opened up before us. We looked around for security but found no one. It seemed like this place was not guarded. Oliver was the first to squeeze through the hole in the fence, and we followed him. Before us stretched a plain. It was an empty space we had to cross to reach the building. We bent down and followed Oliver. As we progressed, our gaze constantly scanned the surroundings, and we made every effort to keep our steps from breaking the prevailing silence. As we walked, suddenly my attention was drawn to unusual tracks on the ground. They resembled dog paw prints, but their size exceeded all expectations. They were simply gigantic. This observation briefly sparked a thought in my mind about the wild inhabitants of these places, but I decided not to dwell on it too much, focusing on our goal. Finally, through the darkness of the night, the dark outlines of buildings began to emerge, like ghosts of the past, rising against the backdrop of the starry sky. We passed by numerous abandoned structures, laboratories, warehouses, hangars, each of which seemed to hold its own secrets and stories. These buildings varied in size and shape, some overgrown with dense vegetation, others dilapidated and almost destroyed by time. All of this created a sense of a forgotten world where time stood still. With confidence, Oliver led us through this labyrinth of oblivion, clearly having a goal in mind. We circumvented one building after another until we reached one that apparently was our destination. It was an old research laboratory, appearing more imposing and better preserved than the others. Its facade was lined with gray tiles, some stained with rust spots and covered with patches of moss, while the windows on the ground floor were boarded up, giving it an even more ominous appearance. A faded sign hung above the entrance with the name of the laboratory, but the letters were so worn out that they were unreadable. Strange silence prevailed around the building, as if the atmosphere itself awaited our arrival. Oliver stopped, turned to us and whispered, "Here it is, the place we've been heading to." rumor has it that the most unusual experiments took place here. His words added an air of mystery, and we, filled with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, followed him inside. Entering the building, we immediately sensed the smell of mold hanging in the air. Beneath our feet, scattered garbage creaked, and the dust, settled for years, rose with each of our steps. There was no lighting, so we took out flashlights to illuminate our path. The corridor ahead stretched far into the building, with doors leading to various rooms along its length. We began to inspect, peeking into each room and cautiously pushing the doors aside. Inside, we were met with empty spaces with peeling paint on the walls, dusty tables and chairs, broken cabinets. Scattered documents, logbooks, and laboratory equipment lay on the floor, but all of it seemed devoid of any significance. Just echoes of past years and forgotten research. Finally, we found the door to the main laboratory, which stood out from the others due to its size and reinforced structure. Carefully opening it, we saw a spacious room with more equipment than in the other rooms. Tables stood in the center, cluttered with test tubes, flasks, and various chemical reagents, while shelves along the walls held numerous labels and records. However, despite all this paraphernalia of scientific activity, we found nothing truly unusual or secretive. It seemed that anything valuable had been taken or lost long ago. Suddenly, immersed in examining old laboratory records, we heard a noise outside the window. Something like scraping or rustling, disturbing the silence of the abandoned building. We all froze and turned toward the source of the sound, trying tensely to make out something in the darkness beyond the window glass. The tension in the air became palpable as each of us realized, in this abandoned place, we might not be alone. For a moment, holding our breath, we remained alert, trying to understand where the noise was coming from. Suddenly, through the ghostly light of the moon, we noticed a vehicle slowly approaching the building. Our hearts pounded faster with excitement and anxiety. Quickly finding shelter in the shadows of old laboratory tables and shelves, we tried not to reveal our presence. From the car emerged several people dressed in black uniforms who began unloading heavy crates from the vehicle. They acted in unison and in silence, adding even more mystery to the scene. After unloading the crates, they carried them into the basement of the building, the entrance to which was hidden behind garbage bins. We, hiding, watched their every move, trying to guess their intentions. What could be in the crates? Why did they bring them here, to this abandoned laboratory? And who were they anyway? Dozens of questions swirled in our heads unanswered. An atmosphere of tense anticipation hung in the air as we tried to remain unnoticed, making every effort not to make a sound. Soon after they finished their mysterious business in the basement, the people in black left the building, and getting into their cars, quickly drove away. Filled with curiosity, we decided to find out what they had hidden in the basement. Approaching the place where they had worked, we found garbage bins. Pushing them aside, we found a door, locked with a keypad. The question arose: how to crack it? Oliver, showing ingenuity, proposed a solution. He remembered that some old keypad locks showed wear on the buttons used for entering the most common combinations. Carefully inspecting the keyboard, he noticed signs of wear on some of them. Trying several of the most obvious and frequently used combinations with these numbers, Oliver was able to guess the correct code, and the door opened with a slight click. Stepping over the threshold of the open door, we were amazed to find that the basement was unusually bright inside. Light emanating from unknown sources illuminated our path forward, through a corridor adorned with antique lamps, adding an atmosphere of mystery and long-gone times. As we proceeded further down the corridor, we came across a staircase leading deep into the heart of the underground. With each step downward, the sounds of our footsteps echoed in the silence. The staircase turned out to be quite long, and the descent took quite some time. When we finally reached the end of the staircase, we found ourselves in a vast underground chamber that surpassed all our expectations in size and equipment. It was a huge laboratory filled with the most modern equipment: rows of computers, experimental setups, various chemical substances, and complex instruments. The walls were lined with boards for notes and monitors displaying data from unknown experiments. The light in this room was bright and clear. We were filled with a mixed feeling of amazement and admiration. As we progressed deeper into the laboratory, we carefully examined every corner of this underground realm of science, noting various experimental setups and instruments that we had only read or heard about in lectures before. Our curiosity grew with each step until we finally found ourselves in the center of the laboratory, where a shocking sight awaited us. On a huge table lay the carcass of a creature, the sight of which froze us in horror. It particularly affected the girls. The creature resembled a werewolf from folklore, powerful, with sharp claws and teeth, instilling fear with its appearance alone. The creature's body was attached with sensors and wires, and next to it stood a monitor displaying its vital signs. The creature was securely chained to the table by its arms and legs, indicating its potential danger. Next to it was a strange object resembling a bomb with a timer, but the timer was not activated. Wires also extended from it to the monster. This whole scene was shrouded in mystery and immediately raised a multitude of questions about the origin of the creature and the purposes of the experiments. Oliver, not losing his composure, pulled out a Geiger counter and carefully approached it to both the creature's body and the strange object. The device immediately reacted, starting to emit characteristic clicks that increased as it approached the objects. "They emit radiation," Oliver stated confidently, surveying the readings of the device. Liz panicked and started pulling my sleeve, repeating that we needed to get out of here urgently. I also thought it was a dangerous place. Mike quickly pulled out his phone, trying to capture this incredible moment. He began to film the creature's body and the surrounding equipment, trying to capture every detail of this mysterious scene. Suddenly, our attention was interrupted by the noise of an opening door. The echo of footsteps in the corridor leading to the laboratory made us freeze. Someone had entered the building and, apparently, was heading straight for us. We exchanged frightened glances, realizing that we would be caught if we were discovered here. Without a word, we rushed to find shelter. In haste, we found refuge behind large crates in the corner of the huge chamber. Our hearts pounded like crazy, our ears pounded from tension. We clutched our phones, barely holding our breath, trying not to make a sound. With each step of the approaching person, our anxiety grew. Soon, from our hiding spot, we noticed a man entering the laboratory. His gaze roamed the room with surprise and curiosity, as if he were here for the first time and couldn't believe his eyes. He carefully inspected the equipment and tools, then his gaze fell upon the werewolf lying on the table. The man approached the creature's body and began to study it carefully, occasionally making notes and taking pictures. His actions seemed deliberate and methodical, as if he were trying to document every detail for further analysis. We watched him in complete bewilderment, hiding ourselves. Who was this man, and how did he manage to infiltrate this place? It became clear that we were not the only ones drawn to the mysteries of this location. Our thoughts revolved around questions of his motives and goals. Could he be part of the organization behind the experiments in this laboratory? Or did he, like us, stumble upon this place by chance? Hiding behind the crates, we whispered anxiously, trying to decide on the best course of action in this unforeseen situation. The question of whether to come out of hiding or wait became increasingly pressing. But before we could come to any decision, our deliberations were interrupted by a new sound, loud footsteps and the creaking of an opening door. It was clear that someone else had entered the laboratory. The stranger also heard these sounds. We watched as he flinched and began to look around, trying to determine the source of the noise. His face showed sudden fear, and to our horror, he quickly headed towards our hiding spot, apparently seeking a place to hide from the newcomers. As the people at the entrance continued to approach, the stranger climbed behind the crates next to us. Our eyes met. At first he looked at us with confusion, then apparently realizing, he quietly crouched down next to us. 5 men in black uniforms entered the room, discussing something tense among themselves. They carried a heavy object covered with cloth on stretchers. We and our unexpected companion froze in hiding, observing their actions. They carefully brought the object on stretchers into the center of the room and laid it next to the table where the werewolf already lay. Then, removing the covering cloth, they revealed another body of a similar creature, unconscious. With genuine surprise, we watched their actions as one of the men in black accidentally lost his grip, and the monster's head fell onto the table with a thud. His comrade scolded him, warning that this creature could wake up at any moment, so we need to secure it as soon as possible. Apologizing, the second man began to work more carefully. Suddenly, one of them noticed that the creature was slowly opening its eyes. Horror gripped him, and he involuntarily screamed in fear. This unexpected cry awakened the predator instincts in the werewolf. With a swing of his hand, the creature forcefully pushed the man backward. Then, with unexpected agility and strength, the werewolf leaped and pounced on another man in black. The other 3 employees, assessing the threat, quickly drew their weapons and opened fire. But the werewolf was surprisingly fast and rushed towards the next victim, closing the distance between them with every moment. Now only 2 men remained. One continued to shoot desperately, trying to stop the monster, while the last one, full of despair and realizing that his chances of survival were rapidly diminishing, headed towards the bomb. Ignoring the bullets, the werewolf completed its cruel massacre of the 4th opponent and turned its attention to the last remaining human. With fear in his eyes and realizing that he couldn't defeat the creature, the man decided on a desperate move. With a cry of "Die with us," he activated the detonator on the bomb. At that moment, the werewolf with inhuman strength lunged at the man, tearing him apart. Then the monster raised its head and let out a terrible howl. Events unfolded so swiftly that we could barely comprehend what was happening. Hiding even deeper behind the crates, we tried to remain perfectly still, fearing to attract attention. The man who had hidden with us, witnessing all this horror, began to nervously fidget and worry, his reaction only adding to the overall tension. After the werewolf killed all the laboratory staff, it turned its attention to another creature lying on the table. With unexpected ease, the werewolf freed it from the chains that bound it. Then, grabbing it by the leg with one hand and the bomb with the other, the creature dragged them towards the exit. Once the werewolves had left the laboratory, we relaxed slightly, but the mysterious stranger who had hidden with us was filled with concern. He asked who we were, and we replied that we were just students who had accidentally ended up here. He nodded, then explained that we were in grave danger and that he urgently needed our help. He quickly explained that one of the employees, in desperation, had activated a nuclear bomb, and now we had only half an hour to disarm it. Otherwise, we would all face certain death. Escaping the blast radius was unlikely. Horrified by the revelation, we asked him who he was. He introduced himself as Eric Marshall, and he had once worked in this laboratory and was one of the developers of those very creatures. All this time, he began with a heavy sigh, we've been supported not just by some abstract scientific initiative. In reality, there's a secret organization behind all of this, funded by a well-known millionaire. His goal is research in the field of radioactive mutation, which, in his opinion, could fundamentally change the future of humanity. Dr. Marshall looked at us, deep concern evident in his gaze. The experiments conducted here far exceeded ordinary scientific ethics. The main goal was to create beings with unique abilities through radioactive mutation. These creatures, you've already seen what it led to. It all started with good intention, using the data obtained to develop new methods of treatment, improve human physical and mental abilities. But gradually the research got out of control, turning into an uncontrollable pursuit of power and dominance. And I was part of it until I realized where it was all heading and tried to stop this madness. Dr. Marshall sighed once more, a shadow of regret flickering in his eyes. Now that you know the truth, you understand how high the stakes are and how important it is for us to disarm the bomb and stop these experiments. We cannot allow the results of our research to fall into the wrong hands or be used for harm. He also mentioned that these monsters feed on radioactive radiation, which is why they took the bomb. He didn't elaborate further. Time was pressing. After some reflection, Dr. Marshall proposed a plan. We needed to create an antidote for temporarily neutralizing the creatures and assemble an EMP gun to disarm the bomb, as he didn't know its unlock code. Surveying the laboratory, he confidently remarked, "Everything we need should be here." After that, he took charge of creating the antidote, while we began to gather the necessary components and equipment according to his instructions. Oliver took charge of searching for and preparing electrical equipment for the EMP gun. He found several powerful batteries, inductors, and microchips in one of the laboratory's storerooms that could be used as the main components for creating a powerful electromagnetic pulse. The EMP gun was an impressive device, consisting of a long barrel assembled from several inductors arranged sequentially along a metal frame. At the rear of the device was a control panel with several switches and an activation button. The batteries providing power for the gun were securely attached to the frame and connected to the inductors by thick wires, ensuring maximum energy transfer. All this was mounted on a mobile cart, allowing the gun to be easily moved around the laboratory and aimed in the desired direction. Meanwhile, Dr. Marshall worked on creating small bombs from the antidote, which were intended for the temporary neutralization of the creatures. These devices were designed to explode upon contact with the target, spreading the antidote in the immediate vicinity of the werewolves. Using ordinary laboratory test tubes and adding a special catalyst to them, he made them safe to carry but effective in use. Armed and ready, we were prepared to head to the nest of these creatures. Dr. Marshall speculated on where it might be. It was an old part of the laboratory, abandoned many years ago, where the initial experiments on creating the creatures were conducted. According to him, this place had a complex system of tunnels and rooms, which could provide the creatures with an ideal refuge. The path to the old laboratory led through abandoned corridors and partially ruined halls, remnants of the former glory of this scientific complex. Lighting here was scarce, so we relied on our flashlights, their beams piercing the darkness, revealing to us the labyrinth of passages and transitions. The air was filled with the smell of mold and old paper, and underfoot, scattered debris often squeaked. Every step in this place seemed like a loud echo in the silence of forgotten corridors. From time to time, we were startled by sounds that seemed not just random creaking of old structures, but something more alarming. Noises and knocks echoed here and there, as if something or someone was watching us from the darkness, maneuvering in the shadows, remaining unseen. We would pause to listen, our hearts skipping a beat at each new sound. At one moment, it seemed like footsteps were audible, following us, causing us to turn around and look. But every time, our gaze met only emptiness. Imagination painted the most horrifying pictures, making our hair stand on end. Passing by long-forgotten laboratory tables covered in layers of dust and scattered substances, we approached closer to the place Dr. Marshall had mentioned. This part of the laboratory was even more dilapidated, with walls cracked and some doors torn off their hinges, adding to the gloominess of the atmosphere. Suddenly, as we passed by one of the wide-open doors, we all heard a distinct sound. It seemed like something heavy had been dropped onto the floor in the adjacent room. We froze, listening intently, but after a short pause, we decided to move on. Finally, after a long and anxious journey, we reached the place Dr. Marshall referred to as the creature's nest. However, to our surprise, there was no one here. Only the dark corners of the old laboratory and the bomb, installed right in the middle of the room, surrounded by what looked like nests made of debris and wires. The most alarming thing was that the timer was already counting down just 5 minutes. Time was ticking away relentlessly, and the laboratory was engulfed in a deathly silence, broken only by the sounds of our heavy breaths. Carefully preparing for any outcome, we hesitated to step further. Everything around seemed suspiciously quiet, creating the feeling that it was the calm before the storm. And we were not wrong. Suddenly, from the dark corners of the room, as if coming to life from our presence, shadows began to emerge. The creatures Dr. Marshall had spoken of seemed to be waiting for us, hiding in the darkness. The first werewolf leaped out of the darkness so unexpectedly that it nearly knocked John off his feet, standing closest to the entrance of the nest. But John, with excellent reflexes, dodged and, using the antidote prepared in advance, threw it at the creature. The antidote bomb exploded upon contact, enveloping the werewolf in a mist, and for a moment it froze, allowing John to step back. Liz, holding another antidote bomb in her hands, aimed at the second approaching creature. With incredible accuracy, she hit it right in the chest. The werewolf staggered, but its movement slowed down, giving Mike and Jess time to act. Mike, already preparing the EMP gun for use, shouted for us to stand clear. Jess, in turn, assisted Dr. Marshall in keeping the equipment steady while Mike adjusted the flash direction. I, finding myself in the center of the action, took on the role of coordinator, directing each of us efforts, trying to hold the front against the approaching creatures. Grabbing improvised weapons from laboratory supplies, I distracted the attention of the werewolves, giving the team precious seconds. When one of the creatures lunged at me, its movements were suddenly interrupted by a powerful electromagnetic pulse from Mike's EMP gun. A wave of energy instantly swept through the room, causing the werewolves to freeze in place. Their strength left them, and they collapsed to the floor. Then our eyes fell on the bomb timer, and we saw that it was deactivated. Relief and joy washed over us. But our triumph was short-lived. Suddenly, one of the creatures lying motionless on the ground began to stir. The situation changed dramatically, and there was a sense of impending threat in the room. "It's time to go!" I shouted, and those words became a signal for an immediate retreat. We rushed to the exit in a panicked hurry, trying to leave behind the dark laboratory and its horrifying secrets. Our footsteps echoed loudly through the empty corridors, and adrenaline gave us the strength to move faster. Racing past forgotten rooms and overturned tables, we felt fear and anxiety accompanying us at every step. Thoughts raced through our minds about the creature starting to recover and how important it was to escape before it regained its full strength. Reaching the entrance to the laboratory, we burst out into the fresh air and dashed towards the van parked nearby. Dr. Marshall and Oliver reached the vehicle first, quickly opening the doors, allowing all of us to jump inside. We collapsed onto the seats, panting but intact, trying to catch our breath and calm our racing hearts. Oliver, taking the wheel, wasted no time, starting the engine, and the van lurched into motion. Everyone in the cabin exchanged looks of relief and exhaustion after the nightmare we had just experienced, realizing that despite all the trials, we had survived and averted disaster.